The fluorescent lights of Mercy General Hospital hummed with that particular frequency that lived somewhere between a headache and white noise. 11:30 at night, the graveyard shift. When the chaos of the day settled into something quieter, something that allowed you to hear your own thoughts if you weren't careful. Lorelei Brennan didn't want to hear her thoughts. She preferred the rhythmic swish of the mop across linoleum, the splash of dirty water in the yellow bucket, the simple mechanical motion of cleaning. Left to right. Dip, wring, repeat. Her hands moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times before, though if you looked closely, you might notice a slight tremor in her fingers. Age, people assumed, 56 years old, the body breaking down. They were wrong, of course, but Lorelei had learned long ago that sometimes it was easier to let people believe what they wanted to believe. The emergency room floor stretched before her a battlefield of its own kind. Not the kind she used to know, where the sand was red and the air tasted like copper and fear. This battlefield smelled of antiseptic and false promises. The fluorescent lights reflected off the wet floor, creating pools of white light that looked almost like water. She wore navy blue scrubs that had seen better days, the fabric soft from too many washes. Her name tag read simply, L. Brennan, R.N. Nothing more, nothing less. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back in a tight bun, severe and practical. A woman invisible by design. The sound of laughter shattered her rhythm. "Brennan's still here." Dr. Ashton Sterling emerged from the doctor's lounge like he owned the world because in many ways he did. 33 years old, Harvard Medical School. Hair the color of summer wheat, styled with the kind of casual perfection that cost money. He wore his white coat like armor, crisp and pristine, with Chief of Emergency Medicine embroidered in navy thread over the pocket. Behind him, 3 residents followed like eager puppies, all of them in their late 20s or early 30s, all of them looking at Lorelei with that particular expression she had come to know well. Pity mixed with contempt, the look reserved for those who had failed to achieve anything worth mentioning. "I thought the geriatric ward closed at 9, Sterling continued, his voice carrying that particular tone of false friendliness that was somehow worse than outright cruelty. The residents laughed, not because it was funny, but because he was the one who said it. Lorelei's hands tightened on the mop handle. She kept her eyes down, focused on the wet floor, on the reflection of the lights. Her right leg gave a small limp as she shifted her weight. Old injury, they all assumed. War wound, probably. Poor old woman. "You're just a nurse sweetheart," Sterling said, stepping around her wet floor like it personally offended him. "This is a doctor's world. Stay in your lane." The words hung in the air like smoke. Lorelei looked up slowly. Her face was lined with years, with experiences that these young doctors couldn't begin to imagine. For just a moment, something flickered in her pale eyes, something hard and sharp and dangerous. Then it was gone. "Yes, doctor," she said quietly, her voice carrying the soft accent of someone from the South, though the edges had been worn smooth by time and travel. Sterling smiled satisfied and continued down the hallway with his entourage. Their laughter echoed off the walls, bouncing around the empty ER like bullets in a canyon. Lorelei stood alone in the middle of the wet floor, surrounded by her own reflection. She looked down at her hands. The tremor had stopped. Her grip on the mop handle was rock steady, the knuckles white with pressure. She took a slow breath, held it, released it. Then she went back to mopping, left to right, dip, wring, repeat. Some battles weren't worth fighting, not yet. The women's locker room was a narrow space that smelled of industrial soap and old coffee. Lorelei sat on the wooden bench staring into her open locker. The metal door had a few dents, the kind that came from years of use and abuse. Someone had scratched initials into the paint. JM plus RT, a small rebellion in a controlled environment. Inside the locker, Lorelei kept her life to a minimum. A coffee mug with the Navy anchor emblem, the gold paint chipped and fading. A photograph in a simple black frame. A man in a Navy flight suit standing in front of an F/A-18 Super Hornet. Lieutenant Commander Thomas Brennan. Dark hair, easy smile. The kind of man who made you feel safe just by being in the room. KIA Afghanistan, 2008. 17 years ago, and it still felt like yesterday. Lorelei reached out and touched the photograph, her fingers gentle against the glass. She didn't cry anymore. The tears had run dry somewhere between the funeral and the flag presentation and the long, empty years that followed. Ms. Laurie. The voice was young and hesitant. Lorelei turned to see Grace Whitmore standing in the doorway, 26 years old, brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, wide eyes that still held that optimistic shine that the job hadn't beaten out of her yet. Give it time. "You okay?" Grace asked, stepping into the locker room. She wore scrubs covered in coffee stains from a long shift. "I heard what Dr. Sterling said. That was nothing I haven't heard before," Lorelei said, closing the locker door gently. The photograph disappeared behind metal. "Don't worry about it, honey." "But it's not right," Grace protested, her voice rising with the passion of youth. "The way he talks to you, to all of us, like we're nothing, like we're just maids or something." Lorelei stood up, favoring her right leg slightly. The limp was subtle but noticeable. "Pick your battles, Grace. Save your energy for the ones that matter." Grace looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Lorelei's expression stopped her. The older nurse's face was calm, almost serene, but her eyes held a weight that made Grace think of deep water, the kind you couldn't see the bottom of. "I'm heading back to the floor," Lorelei said, brushing past Grace. "Night shift doesn't clean itself." She walked down the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. The hospital at night was a different creature, quieter, more honest. The desperately sick didn't care about visiting hours or proper procedure. They simply fought to breathe, to survive, to see one more sunrise. Lorelei understood that fight better than most. She made her way to the supply closet, pulling out fresh linens and disinfectant spray. Room 4 needed to be turned over. Room 7 needed new IV poles. The waiting room chairs needed to be wiped down. Routine work, invisible work, the kind that kept the world turning but earned no recognition. She was halfway through sanitizing the waiting room when she heard it. Laughter. Again. The nurse's station was a circular desk in the center of the ER Command Central for the overnight shift. Lorelei had been heading there to check the assignment board when Dr. Sterling appeared, materializing from one of the patient rooms like a ghost in expensive shoes. He walked up to the counter and slammed a patient file down on the surface. The sound echoed like a gunshot. 5 other members of the night staff looked up, 2 nurses, 1 physician assistant, 2 orderlies, all of them witness to whatever was about to unfold. Lorelei approached slowly, her rag and spray bottle still in hand. She could feel the weight of their stares, could sense the discomfort radiating from her colleagues like heat. "Coffee break already, Brennan?" Sterling asked without looking at her. He was flipping through the patient file with the kind of casual disinterest that suggested he already knew what was inside. "Must be nice, at your age." The other staff members looked away, suddenly very interested in their computers or paperwork or the patterns on the linoleum floor. Nobody wanted to be associated with the target. It was safer to be invisible. Lorelei set down her cleaning supplies. "Just finishing up the waiting room, doctor. Is there something you need?" Sterling finally looked up. His blue eyes were cold, calculating. The eyes of someone who had never been told no, who had never faced a consequence that mattered. "At 56, shouldn't you be home watching Wheel of Fortune?" he asked. His voice was pleasant, conversational. That made it worse somehow. "Or is the retirement home too expensive on a nurse's salary?" One of the orderlies, a young man named Kevin, made a small sound. Might have been a laugh, might have been a cough. It was hard to tell. Lorelei stood very still. "I'm here to work, doctor." "You're what, 20 years past your prime?" Sterling continued, warming to his subject. He leaned against the counter, getting comfortable. This was entertainment for him, a way to break up the monotony of the night shift. Seriously, Brennan, retire already. Make room for someone who can actually keep up. Grace, stationed at the far end of the nurses' station, looked like she wanted to say something. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Dr. Sterling, that's not— Stay in your lane, Grace. Sterling cut her off without even glancing in her direction. His eyes never left Lorelei. Both of you. You're nurses. You take orders. You don't give them. You certainly don't offer medical opinions above your pay grade. Is that clear? The silence that followed was suffocating. Lorelei picked up her spray bottle and rag. Crystal clear, doctor, she said. She turned and walked away, her limp slightly more pronounced. Behind her, she could hear Sterling's satisfied chuckle, could hear him resuming his conversation with the PA about weekend golf plans, could hear the way the world simply moved on like nothing had happened. Because in their world, nothing had. In the supply closet, surrounded by boxes of gauze and bottles of saline, Lorelei set down her cleaning supplies. Her hands were shaking again, but not from age, not from weakness, from restraint. She closed her eyes and took a slow breath, in through the nose, out through the mouth, a meditation technique she had learned in a desert halfway around the world when the sound of mortars was closer than the sound of her own heartbeat. Not yet, she reminded herself. Not yet. 2:15 in the morning. The ambulance bay doors burst open with a hydraulic hiss, and the cold November air rushed in like an uninvited guest. 2 paramedics pushed a gurney at a run, their breath visible in the frigid air, their faces tight with controlled urgency. Male, approximate age 60 to 65. The lead paramedic called out, her voice cutting through the sudden chaos of the ER. Found unconscious in an alley off Morrison Street. No ID, no wallet, no phone, responding to pain stimuli only. Lorelei, who had been restocking exam room supplies, stopped what she was doing. Something about the scene pulled at her attention. The way the patient was lying, the way his hands were positioned, details that most people wouldn't notice. Dr. Sterling emerged from the doctor's lounge, a fresh cup of coffee in his hand. He walked over to the incoming gurney with the kind of leisurely pace that suggested this was an interruption to his break rather than a potential emergency. The patient was a man in his 60s, that much was clear. He wore dirty tactical-style clothing, the kind you could buy at any military surplus store. Combat boots worn down at the heels, a gray t-shirt stained with sweat and dirt. His face was weathered, carved with lines that spoke of years spent outdoors in harsh conditions. But it was his body that drew Lorelei's attention. Beneath the dirt and the disheveled clothing, she could see the build of someone who had once been, and perhaps still was, in exceptional physical condition. The kind of muscle that came from functional training, not vanity. The kind of scars that came from experience, not accidents. Temp is 103.8, the second paramedic reported, hanging the paperwork on the end of the gurney. Blood pressure 90/60, heart rate 120, got what looks like an old surgical incision lower abdomen showing signs of infection. Sterling took one look at the patient and sighed. It was a sound of pure annoyance, the kind you make when your day has just become more complicated than you wanted it to be. Homeless vet, he said dismissively, not even bothering to examine the man properly. Septic. Probably hasn't seen a doctor in years. Why are we getting this? This should go to County VA. The lead paramedic, a woman in her 40s, who had seen enough to know when to argue and when to stay quiet, simply shrugged. Found him 3 blocks from here. You were closest. Sterling circled the gurney, once barely glancing at the patient. His examination, if you could call it that, lasted maybe 30 seconds. He didn't take vitals, didn't check pupils, didn't examine the infected incision. Transfer to county, he said, turning back to his coffee. We don't have the resources for uninsured charity cases. Get him stable enough for transport and ship him out. He started to walk away. Doctor? Sterling stopped, turned. Lorelei had stepped closer to the gurney, close enough that she could see the patient properly. close enough to notice what Sterling had missed. "What is it, Brennan?" Sterling's voice carried a warning. "Don't push. Don't overstep." Lorelei pointed to the patient's shoulder, where his shirt had been torn during the extraction. There, clearly visible, was a scar pattern, not a single injury, but a cluster. Small puncture wounds healed, but permanent. Shrapnel. But not just any shrapnel. Lorelei had seen enough battlefield wounds to recognize the specific pattern. The spacing, the depth, the way the scars radiated from a central point. Fragmentation from a specific type of IED, one that was predominantly used in Iraq, in Fallujah, in 2004. Her breath caught. "Doctor, I think he needs—" "You think?" Sterling's voice rose sharp and cutting. The other staff members in the ER looked up, sensing conflict. "I didn't ask you to think, Brennan. I asked you to prep room 8 for transfer. Can you manage that, or is it too complicated for your skill set?" The patient on the gurney stirred slightly, a low moan escaping his lips. His face twisted in pain or fever or some combination of both. Lorelei looked at Sterling, looked at the patient, looked at the scar pattern on his shoulder that told a story only certain people could read. "Room 8, she said quietly. "Yes, doctor." Sterling nodded satisfied and walked away. The paramedics handed off the paperwork to one of the other nurses and left to answer another call. The ER returned to its normal rhythm, the brief interruption already forgotten. Except by Lorelei. She stood beside the gurney for a long moment, looking down at the unconscious man. His breathing was shallow labored. His skin had that gray pallor that came from serious infection. The fever was burning through him like wildfire, breaking down his body's defenses 1 degree at a time. This man was dying. And Dr. Ashton Sterling had just signed his death warrant. "Grace?" Lorelei called out softly. The younger nurse appeared at her elbow. "Yeah? Help me get him to room 8, Lorelei said. "And then I need you to forget you saw me for the next hour or so." Grace's eyes widened. "Miss Lori, what are you—" "The less you know, the better," Lorelei said, already beginning to push the gurney. "Trust me on this one, honey. Please." Grace hesitated, then nodded. She helped guide the gurney down the hallway past the other exam rooms, past the nurse's station, where Dr. Sterling was now engrossed in his phone, past the point of no return. Room 8 was at the far end of the ER, tucked into a corner that didn't get much foot traffic during night shifts. It was technically an isolation room meant for patients with contagious conditions, but it was currently unused. Perfect. They transferred the patient from the gurney to the hospital bed. Lorelei worked with practiced efficiency, hooking up the monitors, checking vitals, examining the infected incision with careful hands. The wound was bad, worse than bad. It was a surgical incision, clean and precise, but it had become aggressively infected. The skin around it was red and hot to the touch, with early signs of necrosis at the edges. This wasn't street medicine gone wrong. This was a professional surgery that had been compromised. "What's his temp now?" Lorelei asked. Grace checked the digital thermometer. 104.2. It's rising. Lorelei's jaw tightened. She lifted the patient's eyelids, checking his pupils. Reactive, but sluggish. She pressed her fingers to his neck, feeling the pulse. Fast and thready. His blood pressure on the monitor read 85/55. Dropping. This man needed aggressive intervention. Broad-spectrum antibiotics. Fluid resuscitation. Possibly surgical debridement if the infection had gone deep into the tissue. What he didn't need was a 6-hour ambulance ride to County VA. Lorelei made a decision. "I need you to cover for me," she told Grace. "If anyone asks, tell them I'm on break. Tell them I'm in the bathroom. Tell them anything except where I really am. Ms. Lori." "Grace." Lorelei's voice was firm, but not unkind. "This man dies if we follow Sterling's orders. I can't let that happen. I won't. But I need you to give me time." Grace looked at the patient, then at Lorelei. The younger nurse's face was pale, caught between protocol and conscience. "How much time?" she finally asked. 4 hours, Lorelei said. maybe less if I can break the fever. Sterling does rounds at 6:30. I just need to get him stable before then." Grace swallowed hard, then nodded. "Okay, 4 hours. But Ms. Laurie, if they fire you for this, then they fire me," Lorelei said simply. She was already moving, already pulling out her phone to access the hospital's pharmacy system. "I've been fired before. I survived." Grace slipped out of the room, pulling the privacy curtain closed behind her. The heavy fabric created a barrier, a small fortress within the larger hospital. Inside that fortress, Lorelei went to work. First, she accessed the electronic dispensing cabinet using her credentials. The system logged every medication pulled, every dose administered. She was leaving a trail that Sterling would find eventually, but eventually wasn't now. She pulled vancomycin, the heavy artillery of antibiotics. Then, ceftriaxone for broader coverage. Metronidazole for anaerobic bacteria. She was covering all the bases, throwing everything at an infection that had clearly been festering for days. The IV went in smoothly, muscle memory from thousands of insertions over 25 years. Then she hung the antibiotic bag, setting the drip rate carefully. Too fast, and she risked an allergic reaction. Too slow, and the infection would continue to spread. Then she started the cooling protocol. Wet towels on the forehead, the neck, the wrists. Ice packs under the arms and in the groin where the major blood vessels ran close to the skin. Every few minutes she would rotate them out, replacing warm packs with cold ones. The patient's temperature began to drop. Slowly. Painfully slowly. 104.2. 104.0. 103.9. Lorelei sat in a chair beside the bed, monitoring the vitals on the screen. Heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen saturation, temperature. The numbers told a story, and she was fluent in their language. Outside the curtain, she could hear the normal sounds of the ER, phones ringing, monitors beeping, the distant wail of sirens. Dr. Sterling's voice, casual and confident, discussing discharge instructions with a patient. Business as usual. Inside the curtain, Lorelei fought a private war. She looked at the patient's face, really looked at it. The weathered skin, the gray stubble on his jaw, the scars, so many scars. So many. She could map a career in them, a bullet graze on the left temple, a knife wound on the right cheek, burns on the neck that looked like they came from an explosion. This was not a homeless veteran who had fallen on hard times. This was a warrior who was still fighting. The hours crawled by. 3 in the morning, 4, 5. The hospital was at its quietest now, that dead zone before the day shift arrived, and chaos resumed. Lorelei never left the room. She paced. She checked vitals. She changed ice packs. She adjusted IV drips. She did everything a nurse could do without actually being a doctor, and slowly, impossibly, the patient began to stabilize. Temperature 102.1, 101.5, 100.8. Blood pressure 95/60, 102/68, 108/70. Heart rate 115, 105/98. At 5:45 in the morning, the patient's eyes opened. Lorelei was changing out an ice pack when it happened. One moment she was alone with an unconscious man, and the next she was being watched. His eyes were the hard gray of gunmetal, steel. They were eyes that had seen things, done things, survived things that would break most people. Those eyes focused on Lorelei with an intensity that was almost physical. He didn't blink, didn't move, just watched her with the kind of assessment that came from years of evaluating threats and allies in split seconds. Where? His voice was rough, like gravel scraped over stone. "Hospital," Lorelei said quietly, setting down the ice pack. "Mercy General. You came in unconscious around 2:15 this morning. High fever. Infected surgical wound." The man's eyes moved, taking in the room without moving his head. IV line, monitors, privacy curtain, back to Lorelei. "You stayed," he said. It wasn't a question, Lorelei nodded. Why? It was a simple question with a complicated answer, because she recognized the scars, because she knew what that shrapnel pattern meant, because she had taken an oath 25 years ago to do no harm, and that oath didn't come with an expiration date. Because a long time ago in a city made of sand and blood she had saved a man who looked a lot like this one. Because you needed someone to, she said simply. The patient studied her for a long moment. Then slowly, deliberately, he reached up and touched the scar on his shoulder, the shrapnel wounds. His fingers traced the pattern with the familiarity of someone who knew exactly how he got them. Fallujah, he said. 2004, November 16th, second battle, IED en route Michigan. Lorelei's world tilted. She knew that date, knew that location, knew that road. She had been there. The patient's eyes locked onto hers. I was a SEAL officer, lieutenant commander. We were extracting a downed pilot when the IED hit. I took shrapnel, lots of it. Should have bled out in the sand. His hand dropped back to the bed. But I didn't. Because a Navy corpsman pulled me out of the kill zone, stopped the bleeding, kept me alive long enough for medevac. I never saw her face clearly. Too much dust, too much smoke, but I heard her voice. He paused. Soft. Southern accent, calm. She told me to stay with her, told me I was going to make it, told me she had me. Lorelei couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't do anything except stare at this man who was dragging memories from a place she had locked away years ago. That voice, the patient said, his eyes never leaving hers. I've been hearing it in my head for 21 years. Never thought I'd hear it again in person. He smiled a small, tired smile that transformed his weathered face. You're her. You're Valkyrie. The name hit Lorelei like a physical blow. It had been so long since anyone had called her that, her call sign, her identity in another life, another world. Senior Chief Lorelei Brennan, FMF Corpsman, Valkyrie. Sir, she started, but he cut her off. Nathaniel Cross, he said. Rear Admiral, United States Navy, retired, mostly. That small smile again. And I owe you my life, again it seems. Lorelei opened her mouth to respond, but the sound of footsteps in the hallway froze her in place. Multiple footsteps. Angry footsteps. Dr. Sterling's voice cut through the quiet ER like a knife. Where the hell is she? The privacy curtain was ripped back with enough force to tear one of the plastic rings. Sterling stood there, his face purple with rage. Behind him, 2 security guards in hospital uniforms looked distinctly uncomfortable. I warned you. Sterling spat his finger, jabbing at Lorelei. I gave you a direct order. Transfer to county. Instead, you stole medication. You misappropriated hospital resources. You defied the chief of surgery. He stepped into the room, and the guards followed reluctantly. He would have died, Lorelei said, standing up. She positioned herself between Sterling and the bed, between the angry doctor and the patient who had just identified her as Valkyrie. Look at him. He's conscious. The fever broke. The antibiotics worked. I don't care. Sterling's voice rose to a shout. You're a nurse. You don't make medical decisions. You follow orders. Admiral Cross tried to sit up, his face darkening with anger, but Lorelei put a gentle hand on his shoulder. Sir, please, don't. Get him out of here, Sterling ordered the guards. Transfer him to county, now. And you? He turned his rage back to Lorelei. Take off your badge. The room went silent. One of the guards, a man named Rex Harper, who Lorelei had worked with for years, looked at the floor. I'm sorry, Lori, he said quietly. Lorelei reached up and unclipped her badge from her scrubs. The plastic ID with her picture, her name, her credentials. She had worn it every shift for 13 years. She took the stethoscope from around her neck, the one with the anchor engraved on the chest piece. A gift from the Navy when she retired in 2012, 25 years of service compressed into a single piece of medical equipment. She placed both items on the bedside table next to the Admiral. You're stable, she said to him, her voice professional despite everything. Don't let them move you until you're ready. Drink water. Rest. The Admiral didn't say a word. He was staring at Sterling with an expression that would have terrified a smarter man. But Sterling was too blinded by ego and vindication to notice. His hand moved subtly under the sheet. His fingers tapped a rhythm against his thigh. A pattern. A count. "Get out!" Sterling sneered at Lorelei. "You're fired. Security will escort you out of the building." Lorelei picked up her bag. She looked once more at the Admiral, then turned and walked out of room 8. Her head was high. Her back was straight. She had the dignity of someone who had done the right thing and knew it even if the world disagreed. Grace was standing near the nurse's station, tears streaming down her face. Other staff members watched in silence as Lorelei walked past, escorted by Rex and the other guard. The automatic doors of the ER slid open, and the cold November morning hit Lorelei like a slap. It was raining, a miserable, stinging drizzle that soaked through clothing in seconds. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking back at Mercy General, the building where she had worked for 13 years, where she had saved lives and held hands and whispered comfort to the dying. She checked her pockets, car keys, but then she remembered her car was in the shop, transmission problems. She had taken the bus to work, and the next bus wouldn't run until 7 on Sunday mornings. It was 6:25. Her apartment was 5 miles away. "Perfect," she muttered, pulling her thin jacket tighter against the rain. She started walking. The rubber soles of her nursing clogs squeaked against the wet pavement. Cars rushed by, spraying dirty water onto her legs. She clutched a small cardboard box that hospital security had graciously allowed her to pack. A photograph of her husband, a coffee mug, a spare pair of socks. 25 years in the Navy. 13 years at Mercy General, a lifetime of service, reduced to a soggy cardboard box and a long walk home in the rain. Lorelei was about 2 miles from the hospital, walking along a stretch of road that bordered a large field used for community events in summer when the anger began to fade. It was replaced by something colder. Fear. How would she pay rent? Who would hire a 56-year-old nurse fired for insubordination and theft? Sterling would make sure she never worked in this city again. He had the connections, the family name, the power. She was 56 years old, a widow, unemployed. She kept walking, one foot in front of the other. The rain came down harder, and then she heard it. At first it was just a feeling, a pressure change in the air, a vibration that lived somewhere below sound, felt more in the chest than heard with the ears. Lorelei stopped walking. The feeling grew stronger, a low thrumming that made her molars ache. The kind of sound that came from something big, something powerful. She looked up at the gray sky, squinting against the rain. Through the clouds, through the mist and drizzle, 2 dark shapes materialized. Black helicopters, matte black. No civilian markings, just small Navy insignias on the tail. They were flying low, aggressive, banking hard over the tree line. Lorelei stood frozen on the side of the road, rain streaming down her face, watching as 2 MH-60S Seahawk helicopters descended from the sky like angels of war. The lead helicopter flared its nose rotors, beating the air into submission. The downdraft was immense, tearing at Lorelei's clothes, ripping the cardboard box from her frozen hands. Her coffee mug hit the pavement and shattered. The photograph of her husband tumbled into the wet grass. She covered her head, crouching down, terrified and confused. The helicopter didn't crash. It landed, right in the middle of the road, blocking both lanes of traffic. The second helicopter touched down in the field beside her. Before the skids fully settled, the doors slid open. 12 men jumped out, not soldiers, operators. Naval special warfare, full tactical gear, rifles. The kind of men who looked like they could end the world if someone gave the order. They moved with terrifying efficiency, securing a perimeter around both aircraft. One man, the leader, scanned the roadside, his eyes locked onto Lorelei, soaked and shivering, near the guardrail. He sprinted toward her. He was in his 50s, built like granite with a gray beard and a scar through his left eyebrow. He stopped 5 feet away, hands raised to show he wasn't a threat. "Ma'am," he shouted over the roar of the engines, "are you Senior Chief Lorelei Brennan?" Lorelei couldn't speak. She just stared at him, at the helicopters, at the impossible scene unfolding around her. "Ma'am?" He barked again, urgent but respectful. "I need you to confirm. Are you Senior Chief Brennan, call sign Valkyrie?" Slowly, her teeth chattering from cold and shock, Lorelei nodded. The operator tapped his headset. "Command, we have the asset. I repeat, we have Valkyrie. Condition is wet and cold, but secure." He reached out a hand to her. "Ma'am, you need to come with us. Admiral Cross is asking for you. He's refusing treatment from anyone else until you're back. And ma'am, with all due respect, when an admiral gives an order, we follow it." Lorelei looked at his extended hand, looked at the helicopters, their rotors still spinning, emergency lights flashing, looked at the traffic jam forming behind them, drivers with phones out, recording this impossible moment. She looked at her shattered coffee mug on the road, at the photograph of Thomas face down in the grass, and she took the operator's hand. He helped her up into the cabin of the Seahawk. Someone immediately wrapped a warm wool blanket around her shoulders. The crew chief handed her a headset so she could hear over the engines. "Welcome aboard, Senior Chief," the pilot's voice crackled through the headphones. "We're RTB to Mercy General. ETA 3 minutes." The helicopter lifted off, banking sharply. Lorelei looked down at the cars below, at the people standing outside their vehicles watching with phones and cameras. She had been walking in the rain, unemployed and alone. Now she was flying. And somewhere in the back of her mind, beneath the shock and confusion, a voice that had been silent for 13 years began to wake up. The voice of Valkyrie. The voice that didn't take orders from men like Ashton Sterling. The voice that saved lives, no matter the cost. The helicopter banked toward Mercy General Hospital, and Lorelei Brennan realized that this story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The roof of Mercy General Hospital was never designed for military aircraft. It was rated for the lightweight medical transport helicopters that occasionally brought critical patients from rural areas, the kind with corporate logos and bright paint schemes, not for 2 Navy Seahawks carrying a dozen special warfare operators. The pilots didn't seem to care about building codes. The first Seahawk touched down with a jarring thud that shook the entire structure. Inside the ER 4 floors below, ceiling tiles cracked. Dust rained down from the acoustic panels. Coffee cups rattled on desks. Somewhere a heart monitor fell off its cart and clattered to the floor. Dr. Ashton Sterling was standing at the nurse's station, mid-sentence about weekend plans at his family's lake house, when the building trembled beneath his feet. He looked up at the ceiling. What the hell? The second Seahawk landed 10 seconds later, and the vibration intensified. Pictures on the walls tilted. The fluorescent lights flickered. Someone's phone slid off the counter and cracked on the linoleum. Grace Whitmore ran to the window, her face pressed against the glass. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Oh my God." The rest of the night staff crowded around her, staring up at the rooftop landing pad where 2 matte black military helicopters sat like predatory birds, their rotors still spinning their presence impossible to ignore. Sterling pushed through the cluster of nurses and orderlies. "That's unauthorized. They can't just—" He fumbled for his phone, already dialing. "This is Dr. Ashton Sterling, Chief of Emergency Medicine. I want those aircraft off my roof immediately, or I'm calling the police. I don't care who authorized." The elevator at the far end of the hallway chimed. The doors slid open with a soft mechanical whisper. Sterling was still shouting into his phone when the wall of multicam tactical gear emerged from the elevator. 6 operators moving in formation, rifles slung across their chests, night vision mounts on their helmets, faces hard and professional. They stepped into the ER and fanned out with practiced efficiency, securing the corridor like they were entering hostile territory. Behind them came a man in a different uniform, not tactical gear, dress Navy, commander's rank insignia on his shoulders. His face was weathered and scarred, a map of a career spent in places that didn't make it onto tourist brochures. Commander Rhett Dawson walked with the kind of authority that didn't need to announce itself. It simply was. And beside him, wrapped in a gray wool blanket that was clearly military issue, her wet hair plastered to her face, her scrubs soaked through and clinging to her frame, was Lorelei Brennan. The ER went silent. Every conversation stopped mid-word. Every movement froze. 20 pairs of eyes turned to watch the impossible procession walking through the automatic doors. Sterling's phone slipped from his hand. It hit the floor with a crack that echoed in the sudden quiet. "What?" he started, but his voice died in his throat. Admiral Nathaniel Cross was the last to enter. He walked slowly, supported on one side by an operator. He still wore the hospital gown from room 8, though someone had draped a navy jacket over his shoulders. An IV pole rolled beside him, the bag of antibiotics still attached to his arm. He should have been in bed. He should have been at County VA, by now transferred out like Sterling had ordered. Instead, he stood in the middle of the Mercy General ER, looking very much like a man who was used to giving orders and having them followed without question. His eyes swept the room, cataloging faces, assessing threats, calculating variables. Then they settled on Sterling. "Dr. Ashton Sterling." Admiral Cross's voice was rough but clear. Sterling tried to pull himself together, tried to summon the authority that came with his title, his education, his last name. "I'm the Chief of Emergency Medicine, and you are trespassing in a sterile medical zone. I demand you remove these weapons and this fired employee immediately." The Admiral ignored him completely. He turned to Commander Dawson instead. "Secure the floor. No one enters or leaves without authorization. I want a perimeter on all access points." "Yes, sir," Dawson said. He gestured to his team, and they moved instantly. 2 operators headed for the stairwell. 2 more positioned themselves at the elevator. The remaining 2 took up station at the main entrance. Sterling's face went from pale to purple in seconds. "You can't do that. This is a hospital. This is my ER." Admiral Cross finally looked at him. Really looked at him. It was the kind of look that had made junior officers reconsider their life choices. The kind that suggested the Admiral was calculating exactly how many different ways he could end this conversation. "Correction, Doctor," the Admiral said, his voice deadly calm. "This is the location of a critical medical situation involving classified naval operations. As of this moment, this floor is under military jurisdiction under the authority of the Department of Defense." He took a step closer to Sterling despite the IV pole and the obvious pain it caused him to move. "You attempted to transfer a flag officer engaged in active operations to a county facility without proper security clearance. You fired the only medical professional in this building with the specific expertise needed to treat my condition. And you did it all because you were too arrogant to recognize excellence when it was standing right in front of you." Sterling opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish drowning in air. The Admiral turned to the room at large. "Where is Hospital Director Judith Caldwell?" A woman's voice answered from the back of the ER. "I'm here." Judith Caldwell pushed through the crowd. She was 64 with steel-gray hair and a face that had weathered 3 decades of hospital politics. She wore a navy pantsuit despite the early hour, as if she had been expecting this confrontation. "Admiral," she said, her voice carefully neutral, "I apologize for the confusion. Dr. Sterling was following hospital protocol for uninsured—" "Senior Chief Brennan is no longer your employee, Mrs. Caldwell," the Admiral interrupted. "As of 0600 hours this morning, she has been conscripted as a specialized medical consultant for Naval Special Warfare Command under emergency provisions. She outranks Dr. Sterling in this chain of command, effectively, immediately." The room erupted in whispers. Sterling's residents looked at each other confused. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. Rex Harper, the security guard, allowed himself a small smile. Sterling found his voice. She's a nurse. She barely passed her boards 13 years ago. The point is she's incompetent to handle a trauma of this magnitude, Lorelei stood silently beside Commander Dawson, still wrapped in the blanket, still dripping water onto the clean ER floor. She didn't speak, didn't defend herself, didn't need to. Admiral Cross did it for her. "Room 8, he said, his voice cutting through the noise, "where I was being held before you ordered my transfer." According to hospital records, the patient in room 8 was transferred to County VA at 06:15. Caldwell checked the computer at the nurse's station. "That's what the system shows, yes." "I'm the patient in room 8, the Admiral said quietly, "and as you can see, I'm still here." The color drained from Caldwell's face. She clicked through screens, her fingers moving faster. "There's no record of— Dr. Sterling, did you actually complete the transfer?" Sterling's mouth opened and closed. "I ordered it. I gave specific instructions to—" "You ordered it," the Admiral said, "but Senior Chief Brennan convinced your security team that moving a patient with an active fever of 104 would result in cardiac arrest during transport. They delayed the transfer pending stabilization, which is why I'm still alive." He looked at Rex, who stood near the entrance. "Isn't that right, Mr. Harper?" Rex straightened. "Yes, sir." The Senior Chief said moving him would be a death sentence. "We made the call to wait for medical clearance." Sterling whirled on Rex. "You disobeyed a direct order from a physician." "I prevented a wrongful death," Rex said quietly. "Sir?" The Admiral's expression softened slightly when he looked at Rex. "You have my gratitude, Mr. Harper. What's your military background?" "Army Ranger, sir. 2nd Battalion. 2 tours Afghanistan." "You made the right call, Ranger. You saved my life as much as the Chief did." Then the Admiral turned back to Sterling, and the softness evaporated. "Dr. Sterling, I have a question for you. What's the treatment protocol for suspected sepsis in an adult male with no known allergies?" Sterling blinked at the sudden change in topic. "Broad-spectrum antibiotics, vancomycin and—" "Wrong," the Admiral said. "That's the treatment for confirmed sepsis. I asked about suspected sepsis. What tests do you run first? Blood cultures, complete metabolic panel, lactate levels. Did you run any of those tests on me?" Silence. "Did you examine my surgical wound?" More silence. "Did you check my medical history, my vital signs, my pupillary response? Did you do anything except glance at me and decide I was disposable?" Sterling's face had gone from purple to white. The patient presented as the patient. The Admiral said, his voice rising for the first time, "is a Rear Admiral in the United States Navy with 38 years of active service. The patient is also standing right here, listening to you make excuses for substandard medical care." He took another painful step forward. "But more importantly, the patient is dying. Not from sepsis, from something far worse. And the only person in this hospital who can save me is the woman you just fired for having the competence you lack." Commander Dawson stepped forward, pulling a tablet from his tactical vest. "If I may, Admiral." He tapped the screen, and the large monitor above the nurse's station flickered to life. Patient data filled the screen. Lab results that had been transmitted from Naval Medical Center Balboa in San Diego. The results were damning. Blood work taken at 0500 and airlifted to our lab. Dawson said, his voice professional and detached. "Notice the white blood cell count. Notice the eosinophil levels. Notice the liver enzymes." He highlighted specific numbers. "This isn't sepsis, doctor. This is neurotoxin exposure, specifically a nerve agent derivative that mimics bacterial infection while systematically shutting down the autonomic nervous system." Sterling stared at the screen. That's impossible. There's no way to differentiate that from sepsis without specialized testing." "Senior Chief Brennan differentiated it," the Admiral said. "At 0200 hours with nothing but a physical exam and her experience. She saw what you missed because she's actually looked at this before, in combat, under fire, while you were probably still in high school." He nodded to Commander Dawson, who tapped the tablet again. A new screen appeared. Service record. Brennan Lorelei Ann Rank, Sr. Chief Hospital Corpsman, E. 8 years of service 1987 to 2012. 25 years. Call sign Valkyrie. The room went completely silent. Even the monitors seemed to quiet their beeping, fading into white noise. Specialty Forward Resuscitative Surgery. CBRN. Medical Response Combat Deployments. Operation Desert Storm, 1991. Operation Iraqi Freedom, 2003 to 2004, 2006 to 2007. Operation Enduring Freedom, 2009 to 2010. Confirmed nerve agent treatments, 23, 100% survival rate. Developed protocol CBRN-MED-7. Field treatment for chemical weapons exposure, now standard procedure in all U.S. Special Operations Medical Training Awards and Decorations, Navy. Cross Fallujah 2004, Bronze Star with Valor Device ×2. Purple Heart ×2, Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal ×5. Combat Action Ribbon ×3. Grace made a small sound, somewhere between a sob and a laugh. Her hand covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Other staff members were staring at Lorelei with expressions ranging from shock to shame to awe. Sterling looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. Admiral Cross continued relentless. Senior Chief Brennan spent 25 years serving her country. She pulled wounded Marines out of kill zones. She performed emergency surgery in tents while mortars fell around her. She developed the protocol that has saved hundreds of lives from chemical weapons exposure. He paused, letting that sink in. And when she retired, she came here, to this hospital, where she spent 13 years being treated like she was nothing, like her experience meant nothing, like her skills were beneath a doctor who can't even be bothered to examine a patient before condemning them to death. The Admiral's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, which somehow made it more powerful. You called her just a nurse, Dr. Sterling. You told her to stay in her lane. You mocked her age, her limp, her trembling hands. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Would you like to know about that limp doctor? She took shrapnel from a mortar attack in Ramadi in 2006 while treating wounded Marines. 17 pieces of metal still in her right leg. Doctors wanted to amputate. She refused and learned to walk again through sheer willpower. And those trembling hands, the Admiral's eyes were like steel. That's not age. That's her controlling herself, because Senior Chief Lorelei Brennan has the discipline to stand there and take your insults without showing you what she's really capable of. That tremor isn't weakness, Doctor. It's restraint. Sterling had no words. For possibly the first time in his privileged life, Ashton Sterling had absolutely nothing to say. Lorelei finally spoke. Her voice was quiet but clear. Where is the Admiral's current condition assessment? Commander Dawson handed her the tablet. She scrolled through the data with practiced efficiency, her wet fingers leaving marks on the screen. Blood pressure 100/68, she read aloud. Heart rate 115, temperature 102.5, liver enzymes elevated and climbing. She looked up. How long since exposure? 48 hours, the Admiral said. Lorelei's jaw tightened. Then we have maybe 4 hours before multi-organ failure begins. She looked at her watch. Make that 3.5, assuming the progression follows standard patterns. She turned to Caldwell. I need an ICU bay. I need the CBRN protocol kit helicoptered from Balboa Naval Hospital. That's about 90 minutes if they leave now. I need continuous cardiac monitoring atropine, 2-PAM chloride, and diazepam on standby. Caldwell was already moving. Grace, get ICU Bay 3 prepped. Rex, escort the Admiral. Commander, give me the requisition order for the protocol kit, and I'll have our supply officer coordinate with Balboa. Sterling found his voice. Wait. He looked wildly between Caldwell and the Admiral. You can't just waltz in here and take over my ER. I'm the chief of... You're relieved, Admiral Cross said simply. You can't relieve me. You're not. I can, and I am. Under the Defense Production Act Title, 50 U.S. Code, Section 1431, the Department of Defense has authority to requisition civilian medical facilities and personnel during national security emergencies. The Admiral's voice was flat, reciting from memory. "This is a national security emergency. You are relieved. Senior Chief Brennan is in command of all medical decisions regarding my care." He looked at Caldwell. "Mrs. Caldwell, I need Dr. Sterling removed from this floor. Now." Sterling's face went through several colors. "My father is Senator Clayton Sterling. When he hears about this, your father," the Admiral said, "is a politician with no authority over military medical operations. If you'd like to file a complaint, I'm sure the Navy's Judge Advocate General would be happy to discuss your attempted negligent homicide of a flag officer." He nodded to two of the operators. "Gentlemen, please escort Dr. Sterling to his office and ensure he stays there until this situation is resolved." Sterling tried to pull rank, tried to argue, tried to do anything except accept what was happening, but two special warfare operators weren't impressed by his credentials or his last name. They simply took position on either side of him and waited. Finally, with as much dignity as he could muster, which wasn't much, Sterling turned and walked toward his office. The operators followed at a respectful distance. As he passed Lorelei, he stopped. "This isn't over," he hissed. Lorelei looked at him with those pale eyes, the same eyes that had stared down insurgents and chemical weapons and her own mortality. "Yes, Doctor," she said quietly. "It is." Sterling left. The door to his office closed. One of the operators took position outside it. The ER exhaled collectively. Lorelei turned to Commander Dawson. "I need to change into dry scrubs. I need to see the full lab work, and I need someone who can assist me, who won't question every decision I make." Grace stepped forward immediately. "I'm here, Chief. Whatever you need." Lorelei smiled at her, a real smile that transformed her tired face. "Thank you, honey. Stay close. This is going to be educational." She looked down at herself, still wrapped in the wool blanket still dripping on the floor. "I also need access to my locker. My badge and stethoscope are in room 8. Rex was already moving. "I'll get them, ma'am." "Thank you, Ranger." Lorelei walked toward the women's locker room, her limp completely gone. She moved with the confidence of someone who had just remembered who they were. The staff parted for her like water around a stone. 15 minutes later, Lorelei emerged from the locker room in fresh scrubs. Navy blue, like always, but somehow they looked different on her now, like a uniform rather than just clothing. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, military precision. No makeup, no jewelry except for a simple gold wedding band. Her badge was clipped to her chest, and her stethoscope hung around her neck like it had never left. She walked to the surgical scrub station and began the 7-minute process she had learned 25 years ago. Soap to the elbows, nails, between the fingers, palm, back of hand, wrist, forearm, elbow, other side, rinse, repeat. Grace stood beside her, mimicking her movements. "Chief, I need to say something." "Go ahead." "I'm sorry for not standing up for you. When Dr. Sterling was when he was treating you like that, I should have said something, done something." Lorelei glanced at her. "You did do something, Grace. You covered for me when I hid the Admiral. You gave me 4 hours to save his life. That took more courage than telling Sterling off would have." "But there are different kinds of bravery," Lorelei said gently. "The loud kind that everyone sees, and the quiet kind that happens in the shadows when nobody's watching. You showed me the quiet kind. That's the kind that matters most." Grace's eyes filled with tears again. "Besides," Lorelei continued, scrubbing methodically, "Sterling's not your enemy anymore. He's his own worst enemy. Men like that always are." They finished scrubbing in silence, the water running clear, their hands pink and raw from the friction. ICU Bay 3 had been transformed. The operators had helped move equipment, their tactical precision making quick work of what would normally take an hour. Cardiac monitors, crash cart, IV poles, ventilator on standby. Admiral Cross was already in the bed hooked up to monitors. The antibiotics Lorelei had started hours ago were still running, fighting an infection that wasn't really an infection. Commander Dawson stood by the window, tablet in hand. "Protocol kit is inbound. ETA 60 minutes. Lorelei nodded. She approached the bed, her movements professional but with an undercurrent of something warmer. This wasn't just a patient. This was a man she had pulled from a burning Humvee 21 years ago, a man who had remembered her voice for 2 decades. "Admiral," she said quietly, "I need your consent for the treatment protocol. It's aggressive. There are risks." Admiral Cross smiled weakly. "Chief, I've trusted you with my life twice now. I'm not stopping now. Do whatever you need to do. Even if Dr. Sterling was right and I'm just an old nurse with shaky hands." Especially then. His eyes locked onto hers. "Because those shaky hands saved me in Fallujah when I was bleeding out in the sand, and they saved me this morning when every doctor in this hospital had written me off as disposable. I'll take your shaky hands over Sterling's credentials any day." Lorelei placed her hand over his, steady and warm. "Then let's get you through this, sir. Again." She turned to Grace. "Pull up a chair. This is going to take a while, and I want you to see how it's done." Grace obeyed, pulling a rolling stool close to the bedside. "First lesson," Lorelei said, checking the IV line, "when you're dealing with nerve agent exposure time, is everything. The agent works by inhibiting acetylcholinesterase, which means acetylcholine builds up at neuromuscular junctions. That causes a cascade of symptoms that look exactly like sepsis, fever, elevated heart rate, altered mental status." She pointed to the monitor. "But look here. See how his pupils are pinpoint? That's meiosis, classic cholinergic crisis. Sepsis doesn't do that." Grace leaned closer, studying the Admiral's face. "I would have missed that." "Most people would. It's subtle. But in a combat environment, subtle is all you get. You learn to see it, or people die." Commander Dawson's radio crackled. "Package inbound, 3 minutes." "Grace, I need you to go to the roof access and guide them down. Make sure they don't get stopped by anyone who thinks they're not authorized to be here." Grace ran for the stairwell. Lorelei was left with the Admiral and Commander Dawson. "Chief," the Admiral said quietly, "why did you stay at Mercy General, I mean? You could have worked anywhere. Naval Hospital, teaching position, consulting. Why here?" Lorelei was quiet for a moment, adjusting his IV drip. "Because it was away from the war, away from the sounds and the smells and the memories. I thought if I made myself small enough, invisible enough, the nightmares would stop." "Did they?" "No," she smiled sadly. "Turns out you can't hide from yourself, no matter how small you make your world." The Admiral nodded. "I tried fishing. Thought I'd retire to Montana, catch trout, forget everything I'd seen. Lasted 3 months before I was back in the field." "What brought you back?" "Same thing that made you jump into action this morning. The work isn't finished. The mission continues." He looked at her. "You can retire from the Navy, Chief, but you can't retire from being Valkyrie. It's who you are." Before Lorelei could respond, Grace burst back through the door carrying a large Pelican case with biohazard warnings stenciled on the sides. "Got it," she announced, breathless. Lorelei took the case and set it on the equipment tray. She opened it with practiced movements, revealing rows of medications, each vial precisely organized and labeled. Atropine, 2-PAM chloride, diazepam, epinephrine. The tools of chemical warfare medicine. "This," Lorelei said, holding up a vial of clear liquid, "is what happens when you spend 3 years in a desert, surrounded by chemical weapons. You learn to be very, very good at counteracting them." She drew up the first dose, checked it twice, and looked at the Admiral. "Ready, always." The medication went in smoothly. Then Lorelei stepped back and waited, watching the monitors with the intensity of a hawk watching prey. 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds. The Admiral's heart rate began to slow. 115, 110, 105. His blood pressure stabilized. 100/68, 105/70, 108/72. Grace watched in awe as the numbers shifted, as the treatment that Lorelei had developed in a combat zone worked exactly as designed. "How did you know?" Grace whispered. "How did you know it wasn't sepsis?" Lorelei didn't take her eyes off the monitors. "Because I've seen this exact presentation 23 times before. And every single one of those times, if I'd treated it as sepsis, the patient would have died." She glanced at Grace. "Dr. Sterling isn't a bad doctor because he's incompetent. He's a bad doctor because he's arrogant. He assumed he knew everything, assumed his credentials made him infallible, assumed that a nurse with trembling hands couldn't possibly know more than him." The heart rate dropped to 95, normal range. But in combat, arrogance kills. You learn real fast that credentials don't matter, results matter. And the person covered in mud and blood who just saved 6 lives knows more than the person with the fancy degree who's never left the safety of a classroom. She checked the Admiral's pupils, still pinpoint but starting to dilate slightly. "He's responding," she said with satisfaction. "Grace, mark the time. We'll reassess in 30 minutes, and if the trend continues, we move to Phase 2. Commander Dawson stepped forward. "Chief, I have orders to extend an offer from Naval Special Warfare Command. We're establishing a training program for a CBRN medical response. We want you to run it." Lorelei looked up, surprised. "Commander, I'm 56 years old. I've been retired for 13 years. And you just saved a flag officer using a protocol you developed 2 decades ago." Dawson interrupted. "Age isn't the issue. Competence is. And you're the most competent combat medic in naval history." The Admiral stirred. "He's right, Chief. We need you. Not in some consultant role where you file reports and attend meetings. We need you in the field training the next generation, teaching them to see what Sterling couldn't see." Lorelei looked between them, then at Grace, who was watching her with open admiration. "I can't do both," Lorelei said finally. "If I go back to the Navy, I leave Mercy General. I leave the people here who need Chief." It was Judith Caldwell, standing in the doorway. She must have been there for some time listening. "May I make a counteroffer?" She stepped into the room, professional as always, but her eyes were bright with something that might have been respect. "We're creating a new position, Director of Advanced Clinical Education. You would train our nurses and doctors in trauma response, establish protocols, raise the standard of care across the entire hospital." She paused. "And you would report directly to me, not to Dr. Sterling, not to any physician. You would have full autonomy to teach what you know needs to be taught." Lorelei stared at her. "Mrs. Caldwell, I was just fired this morning by a physician who has been suspended pending a full board review of his handling of Admiral Cross's case." Caldwell's voice was steel. "The board met in emergency session 20 minutes ago. Dr. Sterling will not be returning to Mercy General. His privileges have been revoked." The room went silent except for the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. "You want me," Lorelei said slowly, "to stay here and teach. I want you to transform this hospital into what it should have been all along," Caldwell said. "A place where competence is rewarded, where experience is valued, where a nurse with 25 years of combat medicine isn't treated like she's invisible." Grace grabbed Lorelei's hand. "Please stay, Chief. Teach us. Please." Lorelei looked at the Admiral, who smiled. "The Navy will still be here, Chief. But these people need you now. Make your decision based on where you can do the most good." She looked around the ICU bay. At Grace, young and eager, sure and desperate to learn. At Commander Dawson, representing the world she had left behind. At Caldwell, offering her a chance to rebuild from within. At the Admiral's stable, now his vitals improving because she had refused to give up. "I'll stay," she said quietly, "on one condition." Caldwell nodded. "Name it." "Every nurse in this hospital gets advanced trauma certification. Every single one. No exceptions. And every doctor spends a month rotating through the ER under nursing supervision, learning what it means to actually examine a patient instead of just ordering tests." Caldwell extended her hand. "Done." They shook on it. Two women who understood that real change came from within, from refusing to accept that things had to stay the way they'd always been. The heart monitor beeped steadily, 90 beats per minute, strong and regular. The Admiral was going to live, and Lorelei Brennan, who had spent 13 years making herself invisible, was about to become impossible to ignore. Outside ICU Bay 3 through the window, the sun was rising over the city. Morning shift was arriving. Word was spreading through the hospital about what had happened, about the helicopters, about the Admiral, about the quiet night nurse who turned out to be a decorated combat veteran. Dr. Sterling sat in his office suspended and humiliated, his world crumbling around him. But in the ICU, surrounded by people who finally saw her for who she really was, Lorelei felt something she hadn't felt in 13 years. She felt like Valkyrie again. Grace returned with supplies for the next phase of treatment, taking her position beside Lorelei without being asked. The young nurse had refused to leave, insisting she wanted to see the full procedure, wanted to learn everything. Lorelei smiled. "Then let's teach you something, Grace, because what comes next is going to be intense." Commander Dawson stepped back to give them space, his tablet ready to document everything for the Navy's records. Lorelei checked her watch. 7:43 in the morning. She looked at Grace. "Set the countdown timer on that monitor. 4 hours. We start Phase 2 now." Grace's fingers flew across the touchscreen. The display changed, showing bright red numbers. The race against death had begun, and Valkyrie's work was just beginning. The ICU clock read 7:45 when Lorelei began the protocol in earnest. Admiral Cross lay in the bed alert despite the fever that still burned through him. The antibiotics had helped with the secondary infection, but the real enemy was still circulating through his bloodstream, invisible and relentless. Nerve agent derivative, chemical warfare made to look like natural disease. Lorelei had seen it before. Iraq, 2006. A weapons cache that shouldn't have existed. 8 Marines exposed. 7 survived because she knew what she was looking at. The 8th hesitated to trust her diagnosis. By the time he agreed to treatment, his organs had already begun to shut down. She wouldn't let that happen again. Grace stood ready beside her tablet in one hand, determination in her eyes. She had refused to leave after everything that had happened, and Lorelei was grateful for it. Teaching while working kept her focused, kept her sharp. "Grace," Lorelei said, her voice calm and professional, "pull up the digital timer on that monitor. Set it for 4 hours." Grace's fingers flew across the touchscreen. The display showed the countdown in bright red numbers. "From this moment," Lorelei explained, "we're racing against cascade failure. The agent mimics sepsis, but it's actually shutting down his autonomic nervous system. First, the voluntary functions slow, then the involuntary ones, heart, lungs, liver, kidneys. One by one they fail." She looked at the Admiral. "We stop it in phases. Phase 1, stabilize and halt the cascade. Phase 2, eliminate the toxin. Phase 3, repair the damage and prevent relapse." Admiral Cross nodded. "Just like Fallujah, Chief, except this time I'm conscious enough to appreciate your work." Lorelei allowed herself a small smile. "This time you're conscious enough to complain if I'm too rough with the needles." She turned to the equipment tray where the CBRN kit lay open like a surgeon's toolkit. Each vial was precisely labeled, each dose calculated for maximum effect with minimum risk. First dose, atropine 2 milligrams intravenous push. She drew up the clear liquid, checking the measurement twice. Old habits from combat medicine where a mistake meant death and there was no time for second chances. "Atropine blocks acetylcholine receptors," she explained for Grace's benefit. "The nerve agent causes acetylcholine to build up. Too much acetylcholine and your muscles don't know when to stop contracting. Your heart races. Your lungs fill with fluid. Your pupils constrict to pinpoints." She showed Grace the Admiral's eyes. "See that meiosis? Classic cholinergic toxicity. Watch what happens when the atropine hits. She pushed the medication slowly, watching the Admiral's face for any signs of adverse reaction. 30 seconds. His breathing eased slightly. 60 seconds. His heart rate dropped from 115 to 108. 90 seconds. His pupils began to dilate just barely, but enough to notice if you knew what to look for. It's working, Grace breathed. Phase 1, Step 1. Lorelei corrected. We're nowhere near done. The timer counted down relentlessly. Next, pralidoxime chloride, 2 p.a.m. for short. Lorelei prepared a larger syringe, this one filled with amber liquid. This is the antidote. It reactivates the enzyme that the nerve agent shut down, but we have to dose it carefully. Too much too fast and we cause more damage than the poison itself. She set up an IV drip, calculating the rate in her head. 600 milligrams over 30 minutes, slow and steady. The trick, she said, hanging the bag, is balancing the atropine with the 2 p.a.m. Atropine treats the symptoms. 2 p.a.m. treats the cause. You need both in the right ratio, or you're just prolonging the inevitable. Grace was taking notes on her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. How do you know the right ratio? Trial and error, Lorelei said quietly, and too many casualties before we figured it out. The 2 p.a.m. began to drip into Admiral Cross's system. Lorelei watched the monitors like a hawk, tracking every change in heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen saturation. Chief, his temperature's dropping, Grace noted. 102.1. Good. The cascade is slowing. Lorelei checked his reflexes, tapping his knees, his elbows watching for the telltale twitch of overstimulated nerves. Still hyper-reflexive, but improving. Commander Dawson stood by the window, silent but present. He had seen combat medicine before, had watched corpsmen work miracles in impossible conditions. But watching Lorelei was like watching an artist work. Every movement precise, every decision instant and correct. Commander, Lorelei said, without looking up from her patient, I need you to contact Balboa Naval Hospital again. Tell them we need exchange transfusion supplies, large-bore catheters, 14-gauge, blood warmer, calcium gluconate to prevent citrate toxicity, and 5 liters of O-negative screened and cross-matched. Dawson blinked. Exchange transfusion. You're replacing his entire blood volume. The toxin is in his plasma. We can counteract it, neutralize it, but as long as it's circulating, it's doing damage. Lorelei finally looked at him. We're going to cycle his blood, all of it. It's the only way to guarantee complete elimination. That's a massive undertaking, Chief. The risk is less than the risk of letting the toxin continue to circulate. Her voice was firm, but not unkind. I've done this procedure 23 times, Commander. I know the risks. I also know the alternative. Admiral Cross spoke, his voice stronger now than it had been. Dawson, make the call. The chief knows what she's doing. Dawson nodded and stepped out to use his radio. Grace was checking the 2 p.a.m. drip when she noticed something. Chief, his hands, they're tremoring. Lorelei moved to the bedside immediately. The Admiral's fingers were twitching small fasciculations that rippled across his hands like water. Muscle fasciculations, she said, her tone sharpening. The agent is still active in his neuromuscular junctions. Grace, get me diazepam 5 milligrams. We need to calm the nervous system before he seizes. Grace ran to the medication cart. Her hands shook slightly as she drew up the dose, the pressure of the moment getting to her. Breathe, Lorelei said quietly. You're doing fine. Check the dose. Grace looked at the syringe. 5 milligrams, 0.5 milliliters of 10 milligrams per milliliter solution. Correct. Bring it here. Grace handed over the syringe. Lorelei pushed it slowly into the IV port, watching the Admiral's face for signs of respiratory depression. Diazepam is a sedative, she explained, still teaching even in the middle of crisis. It calms the central nervous system, but it also depresses breathing. We give just enough to stop the seizure activity without shutting down his respiratory drive. The fasciculations slowed, stopped. The Admiral's breathing remained steady. Commander Dawson returned. Supplies inbound. Helicopters lifting off from Balboa now. ETA 40 minutes. Lorelei nodded. Good. We'll be ready. She spent the next half hour preparing, setting up the exchange transfusion circuit, calculating volumes, double-checking equipment. Grace assisted learning with every movement, every decision. Outside the ICU bay, word continued to spread. Nurses on day shift were arriving, hearing the impossible story. The quiet night nurse, who was actually a decorated combat veteran. The admiral who had been dismissed as a homeless man. The helicopters on the roof. And Dr. Sterling suspended in his office, his career crumbling, while the woman he had mocked saved a life he had written off. The supplies arrived. A young Navy corpsman, couldn't have been more than 23, delivered the equipment personally. He stood at attention when he saw Lorelei. Senior Chief Brennan, at ease corpsman, set the supplies on the equipment tray. He obeyed, then hesitated. Ma'am, I just want to say, I studied your CBRN protocol at course school. It's an honor to meet you. Lorelei looked at him. This young man who represented the generation she had trained without knowing it. What's your name, son? Hospital Corpsman, 2nd Class, Marcus Webb, ma'am. Well, HM2, Webb, stick around. You might learn something new today. His face lit up. He took position near the door, silent but attentive. Lorelei turned back to her patient. Admiral, this next part is going to be uncomfortable. We're going to put in 2 large IVs, 1 in each arm. Then we're going to slowly cycle your blood volume over the next 2 hours. How slow is slow? About 150 milliliters at a time. We pull out 150 milliliters of your blood, replace it with 150 milliliters of fresh blood. Back and forth, for 5 liters total. The Admiral whistled softly. That's a lot of in and out, Chief. It's the only way to clean you out completely. She prepared the catheter kit. Ready? Do I have a choice? Not really, sir. He laughed, a genuine sound that eased some of the tension in the room. Then let's get on with it. The exchange transfusion began. Grace called out the volumes. 150 milliliters out. Lorelei worked the other line. 150 milliliters in. Back and forth. A rhythm like a heartbeat, like waves on a shore. Out, in, out, in. The Admiral watched the process with clinical interest. This is what you did in Fallujah. Among other things, Lorelei set her eyes on the blood warmer, making sure the replacement blood was at the right temperature. Though in Fallujah we usually didn't have the luxury of time or sterile equipment. You did it in a tent, under fire, with Marines bleeding out on every table. The Admiral's voice was soft with memory. I remember hearing the explosions, feeling the tent shake, and you just kept working, like the world ending outside was just background noise. Lorelei was quiet for a moment. The world was always ending, sir. That was just Tuesday. They continued the exchange. The rhythm became meditative. Grace and Lorelei, working in perfect synchronization, 2 people who understood that precision meant survival. HM2. Webb watched from the doorway, mentally taking notes on everything he saw. This was living history. The Valkyrie herself performing the protocol she had written in blood and sand. Chief, Grace said suddenly, his heart rate, it's rising. Lorelei's eyes snapped to the monitor. 100 beats per minute, 105, 110. Blood pressure's dropping, Grace added, her voice tightening with concern. 90/60. Lorelei moved fast. She checked the Admiral's neck veins, flat. She listened to his heart with her stethoscope. The rhythm was off, irregular. He's having a reaction to the exchange, she said, her mind already 3 steps ahead. The citrate from the stored blood is binding his calcium. We're inducing hypocalcemia. She turned to Webb. Corpsman, I need calcium gluconate 1 gram in that crash cart. Now. Webb moved with impressive speed, pulling the ampule and syringe. The cardiac monitor began to alarm. Not the steady beep of normal rhythm, but the chaotic racing of ventricular tachycardia. V-tach. The heart was beating so fast it couldn't fill with blood, couldn't pump effectively. The Admiral was conscious, but his blood pressure was plummeting. Grace, stop the exchange, Lorelei ordered. Webb, I need that calcium now. She injected the calcium gluconate, pushing it slowly despite the urgency. Too fast, and she could cause cardiac arrest. The monitor continued its frantic alarm. V-tach, V-tach, V-tach. Not converting, Grace said, her voice high with panic. Chief, he's not converting. Lorelei's hand moved to the defibrillator pads already positioned on the Admiral's chest. She had placed them at the beginning of the procedure. All was prepared, all was ready. Charging to 200 joules, she said, her voice calm despite the chaos. Everyone clear. Grace and Webb stepped back. Admiral, this is going to hurt. Admiral Cross, conscious and aware despite his failing heart, managed a weak smile. Do your worst, Chief. Lorelei pressed the button. The Admiral's body jerked with the electrical discharge. The monitor showed a moment of flatline, then V-tach resumed. Still in V-tach, Grace reported. 300 joules, Lorelei said, her hands already adjusting the settings. Clear. The Admiral's back arched. The monitor flatlined again. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Grace held her breath. Then a blip, another blip, a rhythm. Sinus tachycardia, Lorelei announced. 130, but regular. He's back. The Admiral gasped his first real breath in what felt like minutes. Jesus, Chief, I've been hit by IEDs that hurt less than that. Despite everything, Lorelei smiled. Welcome back, sir. She didn't waste time celebrating. Grace, we're resuming the exchange, but slower, 100 milliliters at a time instead of 150. Webb, I need you monitoring his calcium levels every 10 minutes. If they start to drop, we push more gluconate before the rhythm destabilizes. Both of them nodded, shaken, but focused. The exchange resumed. Slower, more careful. 100 milliliters out, 100 milliliters in. The Admiral's heart rate began to drop. 130, 120, 110, 100. His blood pressure stabilized. 90 over 60, 95 over 65, 100 over 70. They were 3/4 through the exchange when Judith Caldwell appeared at the door. She looked exhausted, like she'd been dealing with a crisis all morning, which in fairness she had. How is he? She asked quietly. Stable, Lorelei said without taking her eyes off the monitors. We had a moment of V-tach, but he converted with defibrillation. We're almost done with the exchange. Caldwell nodded. The board has requested a full briefing once the Admiral is stable. They want to understand exactly what happened here. They want to understand how badly Sterling screwed up, Commander Dawson said from the corner where he'd been standing silent watch. Among other things, Caldwell admitted. Dr. Sterling is claiming he was following proper protocol, that his decision to transfer the Admiral was medically sound. Lorelei's jaw tightened, but her hands remained steady on the blood warmer. His decision to transfer would have killed a flag officer. That's not medically sound. That's negligent homicide. The final exchange began. The last of the Admiral's contaminated blood cycled out, replaced with clean, screened blood that would give his body a fighting chance. Grace marked the time. We'll need to monitor him closely for the next 6 hours, but the critical period is over. The Admiral's vitals were improving by the minute. Temperature 99.2, heart rate 85, blood pressure 115 over 75, oxygen saturation 98%. How do you feel, sir? Lorelei asked. Admiral Cross took a slow, deliberate breath. Like I've been through a blender, but alive, thanks to you, again. Last 100 milliliters, Grace announced. Lorelei worked the line with practiced efficiency. Out in done. The timer hit 0. The ICU fell silent except for the steady beep of the heart monitor, a strong, regular rhythm that said life was winning. Lorelei stepped back from the bed, pulling off her gloves. Her scrubs were stained with blood and sweat. Her face was lined with exhaustion, but her eyes were bright with satisfaction. Phase 2 complete, she said. He's stable. The toxin is eliminated. Now we monitor and support while his body recovers. Grace threw her arms around Lorelei, tears streaming down her face. We did it! Oh my God, we did it! Lorelei hugged her back, this young nurse who had trusted her enough to follow orders even when the situation looked hopeless. "You did good, Grace. Real good." HM2 Webb was grinning from ear to ear. "Senior Chief, that was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. Wait until I tell my instructors." "You tell your instructors that the protocol works," Lorelei said. "And you tell them that it only works if you follow it exactly with discipline and precision. No shortcuts, no assumptions, just the medicine." "Yes, ma'am." Commander Dawson approached the bed. "Admiral Naval Command needs to know your status." Admiral Cross smiled weakly. "Tell them Valkyrie pulled me out of hell. Again. And tell them we're keeping her this time." 3 hours later, the hospital boardroom was packed. Lorelei sat at one end of the long conference table, still in her stained scrubs. She hadn't had time to change, and honestly, she didn't care what she looked like anymore. Around the table sat the 7 members of Mercy General's Board of Directors, all of them in their 60s and 70s, all of them looking at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to respect to barely concealed awe. Judith Caldwell sat at the head of the table. "This emergency session is called to order. We're here to review the incident involving patient Nathaniel Cross, admitted as John Doe at 02:15 on November 17th. She looked at Lorelei. "Senior Chief Brennan, can you walk us through what happened?" Lorelei took a sip of water from the glass in front of her. Then she began. She told them about the patient arriving, about Sterling's cursory examination and immediate decision to transfer, about the scars she recognized, about the choice she made to hide him and treat him against orders. She told them about being fired, about the walk in the rain, about the helicopters. She told them about the diagnosis Sterling missed, about the protocol she implemented, about the 4-hour countdown and the VTAC crisis and the exchange transfusion that saved the Admiral's life. She left nothing out. Every decision, every risk, every moment where it could have gone wrong. When she finished, the room was silent. The board chairman, a man named Harold Winters, spoke first. "So, to be clear, Dr. Sterling examined this patient for approximately 30 seconds, made a diagnosis of sepsis, and ordered immediate transfer without running any confirmatory tests." "That's correct. And if you had followed his orders, the patient, a rear admiral in the United States Navy, would have died en route to County Fea." "Almost certainly. Yes, sir." Another board member, a woman named Patricia Knowles, leaned forward. "How did you know it wasn't sepsis?" "Pattern recognition," Lorelei said simply. "I've seen nerve agent exposure 23 times. The presentation is distinctive if you know what to look for. Meiosis, hyperreflexia, specific patterns of muscle fasciculation. Dr. Sterling didn't look for any of those things because he assumed he already knew the answer." Winters made a note on his tablet. "And you developed the treatment protocol used today. In Iraq 2006. It's been refined over the years, but the core principles are the same. By you, by me, and several other Navy corpsmen who saw what I saw and helped perfect the approach." Caldwell spoke up. "The board has reviewed Dr. Sterling's personnel file. This is not the first time he's made hasty decisions based on patient demographics rather than medical evidence. We have 3 other cases in the past year alone where his judgments were questionable." Winters nodded. "Then we need to discuss Dr. Sterling's future at this institution." The door to the boardroom opened. Dr. Ashton Sterling walked in, flanked by a man in an expensive suit. His lawyer, presumably. "I have a right to defend myself," Sterling announced. "You can't make decisions about my career without giving me a chance to present my side." Winters gestured to a chair. "By all means, doctor, please explain your side." Sterling sat down, his lawyer beside him. He looked at Lorelei with barely concealed hatred. "The patient had no identification," Sterling began. "No insurance. No medical history. He presented with fever and an infected wound. Standard protocol in those cases is to stabilize and transfer to the county facility that has the resources to handle charity cases. The patient is a rear admiral," Caldwell said quietly. "I didn't know that at the time," Sterling shot back. "He looked like a homeless veteran. How was I supposed to know he was military brass? You weren't supposed to know his rank, Lorelei said, her voice calm but steel. You were supposed to examine him properly, regardless of what he looked like. Sterling turned on her. You violated direct orders. You stole medication. You hid a patient from the attending physician. I saved his life. You got lucky. I got educated. Lorelei leaned forward. I learned my medicine in places where luck didn't exist, where if you made a mistake, someone died, where the only thing between a Marine and a body bag was whether or not you knew what you were looking at. She pointed at him. You made your diagnosis based on the patient's appearance. Dirty clothes, combat boots, no wallet. You saw homeless and stopped looking. You didn't check his pupils. You didn't assess his reflexes. You didn't run basic blood work. You just decided he wasn't worth your time. I was following hospital protocol. Hospital protocol requires a medical examination before transfer, Caldwell interrupted, which you didn't perform. I have the chart right here, Dr. Sterling. Your note is 2 sentences long. Patient presents with sepsis. Transfer to County VA. That's it. No vitals. No physical exam findings. No differential diagnosis. Sterling's lawyer whispered something in his ear. Winters spoke up. Dr. Sterling, we've also received information about your conduct towards Senior Chief Brennan and other nursing staff. Multiple witnesses report you making disparaging comments about her age, her competence, and her position. Is that accurate? Sterling shifted uncomfortably. The hospital has a hierarchy. Nurses need to understand their role. Their role is to provide patient care, Patricia Knowles said, her voice sharp, not to tolerate abuse from physicians who think credentials are more important than competence. She looked at Lorelei. Senior Chief Brennan has more combat medicine experience than most doctors will see in a lifetime. She's saved hundreds of lives, developed protocols used worldwide, and we've been letting her clean floors because a doctor with an ego problem decided she wasn't worth listening to. Winters nodded. The board has made its decision. Dr. Sterling, your privileges at Mercy General Hospital are hereby permanently revoked. You are terminated effective immediately. Sterling shot to his feet. You can't do this. My father is Senator Clayton Sterling. When he hears, your father is welcome to call me, Winters said calmly. I'll be happy to explain that his son nearly killed a flag officer through negligence and arrogance. I'm sure the Navy will be very interested in that conversation as well. He looked at the security guard by the door. Rex Harper, who had been there for the whole meeting, stepped forward. Mr. Harper, please escort Dr. Sterling from the building. He has 1 hour to collect his personal belongings from his office under supervision. Sterling's face went through several shades of red and purple. He looked at Lorelei, and for a moment pure hatred shone in his eyes. This isn't over, he hissed. Lorelei met his gaze steadily. Yes, doctor, it is. Rex took Sterling by the elbow, firm but professional. Sterling tried to pull away, tried to maintain some dignity, but there was no dignity left. Just a man who had finally faced consequences for the first time in his privileged life. The lawyer followed them out already on his phone, probably calling Senator Sterling to explain the disaster. The door closed. The board sat in silence for a moment. Then Winters turned to Lorelei. Senior Chief Brennan, we owe you an apology. You've been working here for 13 years, and we've been blind to your capabilities. That ends today. Caldwell opened a folder. As I mentioned earlier, we're creating a new position, Director of Advanced Clinical Education. Your responsibilities would include developing trauma protocols, training nursing and medical staff, and establishing standards of excellence across all departments. She slid a paper across the table. This is the offer. Salary commensurate with your experience and qualifications, full benefits, and complete autonomy to run your department as you see fit. Lorelei looked at the number. It was triple what she'd been making as a floor nurse. There's one condition, she said. Name it. Every nurse in this hospital gets advanced trauma certification within the next year, and every doctor, regardless of seniority, spends a month rotating through the ER under nursing supervision, learning to actually see patients instead of demographics. Winters smiled. The board agrees to your terms. Do we have a deal? Lorelei thought about the last 13 years. the invisibility, the insults, the slow erosion of self-worth that came from being treated like she didn't matter. Then she thought about Grace, eager to learn, about the young corpsman who studied her protocols, about all the patients who would benefit from nurses who knew what she knew. She picked up the pen and signed. "We have a deal, 6 months." Later. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Mercy General's new Clinical Excellence Center. The facility occupied the entire third floor, renovated and redesigned to Lorelai's exact specifications. Simulation bays, training rooms, equipment that would have made her 2004 self weep with envy. Lorelai stood at the front of a classroom facing 40 nursing students and 10 physicians in their first year of residency. She wore navy blue scrubs, her name tag now reading Director Brennan, with her rank insignia proudly displayed beneath it. On the wall behind her hung several items: her Navy Cross, her bronze stars, a photograph from Fallujah 2004 showing a young Senior Chief Brennan in desert camis covered in dust and blood grinning at the camera, and a plaque that read Valkyrie Protocol in honor of Senior Chief Lorelai Brennan, USN Wretched. "Medicine," she said, her voice carrying to the back of the room, "isn't about credentials. It's about competence. It's about looking at a patient and seeing a human being who needs help, not a demographic that doesn't fit your preconceptions." She clicked to the next slide. Case study: male 60s, no ID, high fever. "Who can tell me what's wrong with this patient?" A young doctor raised his hand. "Sepsis. Based on what findings?" Fever, elevated heart rate. "Those are symptoms, not findings. What did you examine to reach that conclusion?" The doctor faltered. I would need to examine the patient." "Exactly." Lorelai smiled. "You would need to look, not assume, not guess based on appearance. Look." She spent the next 2 hours teaching them to look. Really look. At pupils, at reflexes, at patterns of scarring that told stories if you knew the language. Grace sat in the front row now, wearing scrubs with Trauma Nurse Specialist embroidered above her pocket. She took notes on everything, even though she'd heard these lectures a dozen times. When class ended, the students filed out. Several stopped to thank Lorelai, to ask questions, to request one-on-one mentoring time. She answered every question with patience, gave every request consideration. This was her mission now. Not pulling Marines from kill zones, but preventing the kind of medical kill zones that came from arrogance and ignorance. Admiral Cross appeared in the doorway. He was in his dress blues, walking without assistance, fully recovered. He'd been promoted to Vice Admiral 2 months ago and now ran Naval Special Warfare from the Pentagon. "Chief," he said warmly, "got a minute? For you, Admiral, always." They walked to her office, a space that overlooked the city. Lorelai had filled it with books and equipment and photographs of the people who mattered. Thomas in his flight suit, her graduation from Corps School, a picture from last week showing her entire training class, 50 nurses who had just completed advanced trauma certification. On her desk sat a new photograph taken last month at the Navy Medicine Gala in Washington. Lorelai in dress blue standing between Admiral Cross and Commander Dawson, all three grinning. She'd kept her wedding ring on. Thomas would always be her husband. But she'd also started accepting dinner invitations from a retired Marine colonel who taught tactical medicine at the university. Small steps, but steps forward nonetheless. "I wanted to give you this personally," Admiral Cross said, handing her an envelope. Lorelai opened it. Inside was a letter on official Navy letterhead. "Senior Chief Lorelai Ann Brennan, USN, retired, is hereby recognized for exceptional service to Naval Special Warfare Command. The CBRN-M8D-7 protocol developed by SCPO. Brennan has resulted in 312 successful treatments of nerve agent exposure across all service branches. Her work has saved countless lives and established the gold standard for chemical warfare medical response. In recognition of these achievements, SCPO Brennan is awarded the Distinguished Service Medal and is appointed honorary advisor to the Navy Medicine Training Command. Lorelei looked up, her eyes shining. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep teaching," the Admiral said. "Say you'll keep turning out nurses like Grace who understand that excellence isn't about degrees, it's about dedication." "I can do that." They shook hands, and in that moment, Lorelei felt the circle complete. From the scared young corpsman in Fallujah, to the decorated veteran, to the invisible floor nurse, to this. Director, teacher, Valkyrie. After the Admiral left, Lorelei stood at her window looking out over the city. On her computer screen, an email notification appeared. It was the monthly report from hospital administration. She clicked it open. Mercy General Hospital, Trauma Outcomes Report. Sepsis mortality rate, down 34% since implementation of new protocols. Advanced trauma certifications, 127 staff. Completed goal, 200 by year-end. Patient satisfaction scores, 91%, up from 68%. 6 months ago, medical error rate, down 41%. Staff retention, up 23%. Attached was a note from Judith Caldwell. "Lorelei, the board wanted you to see these numbers. What you're building here is transforming this hospital. Thank you for giving us a second chance. Judith." Lorelei allowed herself a moment of pride. Then she opened her calendar for the afternoon. More classes, more students, more lives to save by teaching others how to save lives. Her phone buzzed, a text from Grace. "Miss Lori, Channel 7 is here asking about the Sterling case. Should I send them away?" Lorelei smiled and texted back, "Send them to PR. We have work to do." The Sterling case. That had been in the news for months. Doctor. Ashton Sterling had tried desperately to rebuild his career after Mercy General, but word spread fast in medical circles. The doctor who nearly killed an admiral. The doctor who couldn't recognize nerve agent exposure. The doctor who thought credentials mattered more than competence. Nobody wanted to hire him for surgical positions. Nobody trusted him with complex cases. His medical license had been suspended by the state board for 6 months. When reinstated, it came with severe restrictions, no emergency medicine, no hospital privileges, mandatory ethics training annually. He'd ended up at a strip mall aesthetic clinic in the suburbs. Sterling Wellness and Beauty, sandwiched between a nail salon and a tax preparation office. Botox injections, laser hair removal, dermabrasion. According to Grace, who had heard from a friend who went there out of morbid curiosity, his hands shook when he held the syringe. Patients complained on Yelp. Business was slow. Senator Clayton Sterling had tried to intervene on his son's behalf, of course, made some calls, applied some pressure. The Navy's Judge Advocate General reminded the senator politely but firmly that interfering in a military medical investigation was a federal offense. The calls stopped. The Golden Boy's shine had tarnished. Permanently. Lorelei didn't take pleasure in his fall. She just felt nothing. Sterling was irrelevant now. A cautionary tale. A reminder of what happened when ego replaced ethics. Her office phone rang. "Director Brennan." "Chief, it's HM2 Webb. I'm at Balboa Naval Hospital. We just had 3 Marines come in with suspected chemical exposure from a training accident. I'm implementing your protocol, but I wanted to confirm the dosing on the atropine for patient weight over 220 pounds. Lorelei grabbed her reference manual. "Webb, walk me through what you're seeing." For the next 20 minutes, she guided the young corpsman through the protocol, adjusting for the specific circumstances, teaching him to trust his training but verify his decisions. When the crisis was resolved, all 3 Marines stable. Webb thanked her profusely. "You saved them, Corpsman, not me. You did the work. Only because you taught me how, ma'am." After she hung up, Lorelei sat back in her chair. This was the real legacy. Not the medals or the promotions or the justice served to Sterling. This was it. A young corpsman in California saving Marines because she'd taught him how to see what others missed. The sun was setting over the city. Lorelei's office glowed golden in the evening light. She looked at the photograph of Thomas, her husband, lost so many years ago. "I found my way back," she told his frozen smile. "Took me a while, but I got there." Her phone buzzed again, Grace sending a picture from the training center. 50 nurses, all wearing their new advanced trauma certified badges, grinning at the camera. The caption read, "The Valkyries, thanks for teaching us to fly, Chief." Lorelei saved the picture, printed it, hung it on her wall next to her Navy cross. Outside her window, 2 helicopters flew past, heading toward the naval base. She watched them go, remembering the morning 6 months ago when 2 Seahawks had landed in the rain to find her. She had been lost then, invisible, defeated. Now she was Valkyrie again, and Valkyrie's work would never be done. Because somewhere right now there was a nurse being told to stay in her lane, a patient being dismissed based on appearance, a doctor making assumptions instead of examinations. And Lorelei Brennan, Senior Chief, United States Navy, retired, but never finished, would make sure that the next generation knew better, would make sure they saw what she saw, would make sure they saved who she would have saved. The work continued. The mission endured, and the Valkyrie flew on. Senior Chief Lorelei "Valkyrie" Brennan has trained over 600 medical professionals in advanced trauma and CBRN response protocols. Her methods are now standard procedure in U.S. military and civilian trauma centers worldwide. She continues teaching at Mercy General Hospital, where patient outcomes have improved across all metrics. The hospital has become a regional training center for combat medicine techniques adapted to civilian emergency care. Dr. Ashton Sterling's medical license was suspended and later reinstated with severe restrictions. He currently works in cosmetic procedures at a suburban wellness clinic. His father, Senator Clayton Sterling, declined to comment for this story. Vice Admiral Nathaniel Cross serves as Director of Naval Special Warfare. He credits Senior Chief Brennan with saving his life twice, once in Fallujah in 2004 and again at Mercy General in 2025. He visits the hospital annually to speak to new trauma certification graduates. Grace Whitmore is now Assistant Director of Clinical Education at Mercy General. She tells every new class, excellence isn't about credentials. It's about caring enough to see what others miss. That's what Chief Brennan taught us. That's what we teach you. The Valkyrie Protocol has saved over 400 lives since its implementation. The work continues.